Almost since the beginning of Christianity, stories of the shroud that wrapped Jesus' body have been foremost.
It was a hot May night in 1898 when Secondo Pia dipped a glass plate into a tray of chemicals and saw something that shouldn't exist. Instead of a blurry, ancient face, the negative revealed a perfect, hauntingly detailed man.
And it's the image of a crucified man. Let me just show you it here. This is, we'll also see the image of this man of the shroud on it. It's about 14 feet long, this artifact.
Science had just crashed headfirst into a mystery that defied every law of art and history. If this cloth was a medieval fake, how did it hold a photographic secret centuries before the camera was even invented? The Silent Witness, a forensic archive. The Shroud of Turin is a centuries-old linen cloth, bearing the faint image of a crucified man.
Be in the presence of Jesus.
While people all over the world have been struck by its stunning imprint of the face of Jesus Christ, not everyone's convinced that the shroud,
believed by many Christians to be the burial shroud of Jesus Christ, though scientific tests, particularly 1988 carbon dating, place its origin in the Middle Ages. But the shroud is not just a piece of fabric. It is a crime scene captured in linen.
Forgery, rather. The shroud is a cloth that, according to tradition, was used to wrap the body of Jesus after his crucifixion. 25 years ago, the British Museum tested the shroud and decided it was made more than 1,000 years after Jesus died.
To understand the gravity of what Dr. John Campbell and modern researchers are looking at today, we have to look at the canvas itself. This isn't a cheap, common cloth from the Middle Ages. It is a 14-foot-long strip of ancient linen woven in a complex 3-to-1 herringbone pattern, a style of weaving that was rare, expensive, and consistent with the high-status textiles found in the Near East during the 1st century. It was a cloth fit for a wealthy man, which matches the historical accounts of Joseph of Arimathea. But the mystery goes deeper than the weave. When forensic experts look at the shroud, they see a silent witness that has been through hell. The fabric bears the scars of its own survival, charred holes from a 1532 fire, water stains from the frantic attempts to douse the flames, and patches sewn on by concerned nuns. Yet, remarkably, the image of the man remained untouched by the heat. It's as if the cloth was protected by some invisible hand, preserving the data held within its fibers for a future generation that would finally have the technology to read it. Physically, the linen tells a story of geography. When scientists vacuumed the dust from the shroud, they didn't just find European debris. They found travertine aragonite, a specific type of limestone dirt. Under the microscope, this dust matched the chemical signature of the limestone found in the tombs of Jerusalem. Even the pollen trapped in the microscopic crevices of the thread speaks of a journey through history. We see traces of Gundelia tourneforti, a thorny plant that grows in the Judean hills, alongside flora from Turkey and France. The cloth is a GPS map of its own travels. It carries the blood, the dirt, and the biological fingerprints of a specific time and a specific place. It isn't just a painting, it's a biological archive. Before we even get to the how of the image, the where, and the what, tell us that we are dealing with something that was physically present in a tomb 2,000 years ago. It was no longer a matter of faith. It was a matter of physics. STURP, the NASA invasion. In 1978, the Shroud of Turin was subjected to a scientific assault unlike anything in history. A team of 26 world-class scientists, many of them affiliated with NASA, Los Alamos National Laboratory, and the Air Force Weapons Laboratory, descended upon Turin, Italy. They didn't arrive with Bibles or incense. They arrived with 5 tons of state-of-the-art equipment, including X-ray fluorescence spectrometers, thermography cameras, and the most advanced imaging software on the planet. This group, known as the Shroud of Turin Research Project, STURP, had one primary goal: to prove that the shroud was a clever, albeit ancient, forgery. They expected to find paint, pigment, or the telltale signs of a medieval artist's hand. What they found instead was a scientific nightmare. For 120 consecutive hours, the team worked in shifts. documenting every square inch of the cloth. They looked for brush strokes at the microscopic level and found nothing. They tested for organic binders, egg, oil, or wax, and found nothing. They checked for scorch marks that might indicate a heated metal statue had been pressed into the linen. But the fibers lacked the chemical degradation associated with heat. The lead scientists, including Dr. John Heller and Dr. Alan Adler, were baffled. They found that the image was chemically identical to the surrounding cloth, only with a higher concentration of dehydrated cellulose. It was as if the very top layer of the linen had aged instantaneously. Most shockingly, they discovered that the blood on the cloth was real, containing both hemoglobin and albumin. It wasn't painted on, it had soaked into the fibers, whereas the image of the man sat perfectly on the surface. By the end of the study, the STURP team was forced to issue a statement that remains one of the most famous admissions in scientific history. The Shroud of Turin is not the product of an artist. They could tell the world what it wasn't, but they couldn't explain what it was. They had treated the shroud like a space-age puzzle, but the answers were locked in a language they weren't yet prepared to speak. But the camera was only the beginning. The cloth was hiding a secret that required a NASA computer to see. The ghost in the fabric, the physics of the image. To truly grasp why Dr. John Campbell refers to this as a not-of-this-planet phenomenon, we have to look at the image through a microscope. When we look at a painting, like the Mona Lisa, we see layers. A primer, the paint itself, and the way the pigment binds to the fibers of the canvas. The Shroud of Turin has none of these things. There is no ink on the shroud. There are no dyes. There are no pigments. In fact, if you were to stand too close to the cloth, the image would actually disappear. It only becomes visible when you step back, much like a pointillist painting or a modern digital photograph. When the STURP scientists zoomed in, they found something that defied the laws of chemistry. The image of the man is entirely superficial. It exists only on the very outermost skin of the linen fibers, a layer so thin it is measured in nanometers. To put that in perspective, a single human hair is about 75,000 nanometers wide. The image on the shroud is only 200 nanometers deep. It is thinner than the wall of a single plant cell. If you were to take a razor blade and try to scrape the image off, it would be impossible. It isn't on the fibers so much as it is a chemical change of the fibers themselves. This chemical change is known as dehydration and oxidation. Essentially, the cellulose, the natural sugar in the linen, has been turned into a straw yellow color. It's the same process that happens when you leave a newspaper in the sun for several weeks, or when you cut an apple and it turns brown. But on the shroud, this aging process didn't happen over years. It happened in an instant, and it happened with such precision that it created a perfect anatomical map of a human body. Even more baffling is the fact that the image is a negative. In 1898, when Secondo Pia took the first photograph, he expected his darkroom plate to show a positive man with a dark face. Instead, the plate showed a positive image of a man, meaning the cloth itself was the negative. This is a technical impossibility for an artist of the Middle Ages. They would have had to understand the concept of light inversion, something that wasn't discovered until the 19th century, and then paint a perfect negative using a medium that leaves no brush strokes and doesn't soak into the fabric. The image isn't a picture in the traditional sense. It's more like a shadow that has been burned into the very atoms of the linen. It's as if the body inside the cloth briefly became a source of light, projecting its own image onto the fabric wrapping it. But the camera was only the beginning. The cloth was hiding a secret that required a NASA computer to see. The third dimension, topography, of a miracle. While the photographic negative properties of the shroud were enough to stun the 19th century art world, it was the arrival of space-age computing that truly broke the mold of what we thought was possible. In the 70s, researchers took a high-resolution photograph of the shroud and ran it through a piece of equipment called the VP8 image analyzer. This was a specialized analog computer used by NASA to convert images of planetary surfaces, like the craters of the Moon or the mountains of Mars, into three-dimensional maps. Typically, if you take a standard photograph of a person, and put it into a VP8, the result is a distorted, melted mess. This is because a normal photograph records light intensity based on how much light reflects off the subject, which doesn't correlate to the subject's actual distance from the camera. If you have a bright white nose and bright white cheeks, the computer thinks they are all at the exact same height. But when the NASA scientists fed the image of the shroud into the VP8, the screen didn't show a distorted blob. Instead, a perfect, anatomically correct 3D relief of a man emerged from the screen. The image on the shroud was not just a picture. It was a mathematical map of a human body. The darker and lighter parts of the image weren't just shades. They were precise indicators of how far the cloth was from the skin. The closer the fabric was to the face, like the nose or the forehead, the more intense the image was. The further away the fabric was, like the hollows of the eyes or the sides of the neck, the lighter the image was. This distance information is encoded across the entire cloth. It means that whatever process created this image was able to act across a vacuum of space between the body and the linen. It didn't require contact. It acted like a field of energy that diminished with distance. To a scientist like Dr. John Campbell, this is one of the most compelling pieces of evidence. You cannot paint 3D data. You cannot fake a mathematical correlation between light intensity and spatial distance using a brush or a charcoal stick. It implies that at the moment of the image's creation, the body was not just lying there. It was broadcasting data in every direction, mapping itself onto the linen in a way that wouldn't be understood for another 2,000 years. If the image has depth, the next question is terrifying. What kind of energy could scorch 3D data into fabric? The forensic files, blood, sweat, and pollen. Before the mysterious image even entered the conversation, the shroud was a medical document. To a forensic pathologist, the cloth is a bloody record of a traumatic event, and the data found in the stains is just as shocking as the image itself. When the STURP team and subsequent researchers like Dr. Alan Adler analyzed the dark red spots on the linen, they weren't looking at paint or animal blood. They found real human blood, specifically type AB, the universal receiver type, which is relatively rare globally, but found in high concentrations among Middle Eastern populations. But the real mystery isn't just that the blood is human, it's how it exists on the cloth. Under microscopic examination, the blood was found to have been transferred to the linen via direct contact before the image was formed. There is no image underneath the blood stains. This means that whatever flash or energy event created the man's likeness, it was blocked by the physical presence of the blood. Furthermore, the blood contains high levels of bilirubin. In modern medicine, we know that when a body undergoes extreme physical trauma or torture, the liver releases bilirubin into the bloodstream. The shroud's blood isn't just blood. It is the blood of a man who suffered immensely. Perhaps the most baffling forensic detail is the lack of smearing. If you wrap a bloody body in a cloth and then later remove that body, the blood stains will inevitably smear, smudge, or tear the scabs away. Yet, on the shroud, the blood clots are intact. They are perfectly preserved in their original shape, with clear edges and distinct serum halos. It is as if the body simply ceased to be inside the cloth, or became transparent, allowing the linen to collapse through the space where the body once was without disturbing the dried blood. Beyond the biology, the cloth holds a botanical history. Dr. Max Free, a noted criminologist, discovered microscopic pollen grains embedded deep within the fibers. Using forensic palynology, he identified species like Gondelia tournefortii and Zygophyllum dumosum. These aren't just random weeds. They are plants that bloom in the spring and are found almost exclusively in the area around Jerusalem. The shroud isn't just a picture of a man. It is a physical container of the dust, the DNA, and the flora of a specific tomb in the Middle East. Even if the clocks are broken, the evidence on the fibers remains stubbornly, inexplicably present. The carbon-14 glitch, the great dating debate. For decades, the single biggest hurdle for those believing in the shroud's authenticity was a single date, 1988. In that year, 3 world-renowned laboratories in Oxford, Zurich, and Tucson were given small swatches of the linen for carbon-14 dating. The world held its breath, and the result was a scientific bombshell. The labs dated the cloth to between 1260 and 1390 AD. For the mainstream media and many in the scientific community, the case was closed. The shroud was labeled a clever medieval forgery, and the mystery was tucked away in a drawer labeled hoax. But as Dr. John Campbell often points out, science is rarely a closed book. In the years following the 1988 test, a growing chorus of chemists and textile experts began to point out a massive, fundamental flaw in the sampling process. The pieces of cloth used for the test were taken from a single corner of the shroud, a corner that had been handled by countless hands for centuries, and, more importantly, a corner that many believe was part of a medieval, invisible reweave. During the Middle Ages, damaged relics were often repaired by expert weavers who used a technique called French weaving. They would painstakingly intertwine new, dyed threads with the original ancient fibers to repair frayed edges. If the 1988 sample was taken from one of these repair zones, the carbon-14 test wouldn't be dating the original cloth. It would be dating a mixture of 1st century linen and 13th century patch material. Furthermore, newer research has introduced a startling variable: neutron flux. Some physicists argue that if the radiation event that created the image actually happened, it would have released a burst of neutrons. These neutrons could have reacted with the nitrogen atoms in the linen, creating new carbon-14 isotopes. This would essentially reset the radioactive clock, making an ancient object appear hundreds of years younger than it actually is. In 2022, a new study using wide-angle X-ray scattering, WAXS, contested the 1988 results entirely. This method, which measures the structural degradation of cellulose, concluded that the shroud actually dates back roughly 2,000 years, aligning perfectly with the time of the historical Jesus. The 1988 date, once thought to be the final word, now looks more like a statistical outlier, a glitch caused by either a bad sample or a burst of energy that modern science is only beginning to understand. The clock might have lied, but the chemistry of the fibers holds a much older story. The radiation event, not from this planet. This is where the science of the shroud moves from the world of archaeology into the realm of high-energy physics. When Dr. John Campbell uses the provocative phrase, "not from this planet," he isn't necessarily talking about aliens. He is talking about a physical event that has no known parallel in the natural world. If the image isn't a painting, a photograph, or a scorch, how did it get there? The leading scientific hypothesis, supported by researchers at Italy's National Agency for New Technologies, ENEA, is a phenomenon known as a radiation event. For years, scientists tried to replicate the shroud's image using chemicals, heat, and even sunlight. Every attempt failed. The replicas were either too deep, too blurry, or lacked the 3D data. However, the ENEA team discovered that they could create a similar coloration on linen by using extremely short, high-intensity bursts of vacuum ultraviolet (VUV) radiation. Specifically, they used excimer lasers to blast linen fibers with light. The results were hauntingly similar to the shroud. The laser light only affected the topmost layer of the fibers, leaving the core of the thread untouched, just like the shroud. But there was a catch. To create an image the size of a human man, you would need a power source capable of delivering several billion watts of radiation in a fraction of a second. This is a level of energy that far exceeds any technology available in the Middle Ages, and it's a level of energy that a human corpse simply cannot produce. This leads to a terrifyingly beautiful conclusion. The image was formed by light, but it wasn't just random light. It was light that acted with surgical precision. To encode the 3D data we discussed earlier, the radiation had to be collimated, meaning it traveled in perfectly straight lines, like a laser, rather than glowing in all directions like a light bulb. This is why the image is so sharp. If the body had just glowed, the image would be a blurry mess. Instead, it's a high-resolution snapshot of a moment where biology and physics collided. In Dr. Campbell's analysis, he touches on the idea that this event represents unknown physics. If a body were to suddenly convert its mass into energy, a concept famously described by Einstein's E equals mc squared, the resulting burst of light and neutrons would explain every anomaly found on the shroud. It explains the 3D encoding, the superficiality, the resetting of the carbon-14 clock, and even the transparency required for the blood clots to remain intact. When we say it is not from this planet, we are acknowledging that the shroud is a recording of a singularity. It is an artifact from an event where the laws of entropy and decay were momentarily suspended and replaced by a burst of creative radiation. It is a photograph of a miracle, developed in the laboratory of a tomb, using a flash of light that science is still trying to name. If it isn't paint, and it isn't a scorch, we are left with a possibility that sounds like science fiction. Beyond the known laws, the singularity. We often think of the laws of physics as rigid, unbreakable walls that define what is possible. But in the presence of the shroud, those walls seem to turn into glass. If we accept the radiation hypothesis, we are forced to confront a singularity, a moment in time where the standard rules of biology and matter simply ceased to function. In the world of Dr. John Campbell's clinical and scientific exploration, this isn't just about religion. It's about a physical anomaly that challenges our entire understanding of how the universe works. What kind of event allows a human body to emit enough energy to scorch fabric without burning it to ash? In any other context, the amount of radiation required to create the shroud's image would have been lethal to anyone standing in the room. Yet the linen remains intact. This suggests a controlled release of energy that doesn't exist in nature. It's as if the body inside the cloth became a bridge between two different states of existence. Physicists who study the shroud, like Dame Isabel Pitzek, have suggested that the image formation indicates a total suspension of gravity. For the image to be projected onto the cloth with such perfect 3D symmetry, the cloth had to be held taut, possibly suspended in a state of event horizon physics. This would explain why the image is found on both the front and the back of the cloth, with equal clarity. The body wasn't just lying on a stone slab, it was the center of a localized gravitational and electromagnetic collapse. When we look at the shroud, we might be looking at the only surviving data disk from an event that changed the nature of matter itself. It suggests that death and decay are not the final word, but rather a boundary that can be crossed with enough energy. This isn't just not from this planet, it's a hint that there are dimensions of reality and laws of light that our current textbooks haven't even begun to write. We are looking at a glitch in the matrix of the material world, a snapshot of the moment matter became light. Even if the clocks are broken, the evidence on the fibers remains stubbornly, inexplicably present. The unfinished story, the final verdict. The Shroud of Turin remains the ultimate scientific paradox. After a century of intense forensic, chemical, and radiological study, we are no closer to explaining how a medieval forger could have manipulated the atomic structure of linen fibers without leaving a single trace of pigment. It is the only object in the world that becomes more complex and more mysterious the deeper our technology goes. As Dr. John Campbell suggests, we are looking at something that refuses to be categorized by our standard earthly metrics. Whether you view it through the lens of faith as a miraculous receipt of the resurrection, or through the lens of physics as a bizarre electromagnetic anomaly, the shroud demands our attention. It stands as a bridge between the ancient world and the space age, a piece of first-century fabric that waited 2,000 years for the invention of the computer and the laser to finally tell its story. It challenges the skeptic to explain the 3D data and the believer to explain the carbon-14 glitch. Ultimately, the shroud is a mirror. It reflects our own desire to understand the impossible. If the radiation theory is correct, then the image is not a painting of a man, but a recording of a moment where time and eternity intersected. It is a snapshot of a singularity that science cannot yet replicate, but can no longer ignore. In the end, the shroud doesn't provide easy answers. It provides a profound question. If this cloth is real, what does that mean for everything we think we know about the limits of life and the power of light? The mystery remains open, the fibers remain silent, and the man on the cloth continues to haunt the scientific imagination. It is a story that isn't over, It's just waiting for the next breakthrough to pull back the veil. The fifth gospel. If the scientific analysis of the shroud provides the how, the religious perspective provides the way. Within the Christian tradition, the Shroud of Turin is often referred to as the fifth gospel. While the four biblical accounts provide the written testimony of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, the shroud is seen as a visual, silent testimony that fills in the gaps with visceral, bloody detail. To millions of believers, this is not just a relic. It is a direct physical connection to the central event of their faith. The religious importance of the cloth begins with its role as a mirror of the Passion. Every mark on the shroud corresponds with terrifying precision to the biblical descriptions of the crucifixion. The Gospels speak of a crown of thorns. The shroud shows a scalp riddled with puncture wounds that bled into the hair. The Gospels speak of a Roman flagellation. The shroud reveals over 100 scourge marks from a flagrum, a Roman whip with lead balls designed to tear flesh. The Gospels speak of a spear wound to the side. The shroud shows a large blood stain consistent with a wound to the thoracic cavity, where blood and water, plural effusion, would have collected. For the Christian, the shroud is a forensic confirmation of the price paid for their redemption. However, the shroud's importance to Christianity goes far beyond a record of suffering. Its most profound meaning lies in the vacuum it represents. The image isn't just of a dead man. It is an image that many believe was captured at the exact moment of the resurrection. In Christian theology, the resurrection is not just a return to life, but a transformation into a glorified body, a state where matter becomes light. If the radiation theories discussed by Dr. John Campbell are true, the shroud becomes a physical receipt of the most important miracle in human history. It suggests that the resurrection was not just a spiritual idea, but a physical, energetic event that left a permanent mark on the material world. For the modern believer, the shroud serves as a bridge over the gully of doubt. We live in an age of empiricism, where faith is often sidelined by what can be seen and measured. The shroud provides a unique middle ground. It is an object that invites scientific scrutiny, yet remains fundamentally inexplicable. It acts as a sign for a technological generation, much like the doubting Thomas was invited to touch the wounds of Jesus. It is as if the cloth was time-released, hidden in plain sight for centuries until humanity developed the tools, photography, 3D analysis, and particle physics to finally begin to see what was always there. Moreover, the shroud carries a deep symbolic weight regarding the nature of God's presence. In Christianity, the incarnation is the belief that God became human, entering into the mess, the dirt, and the blood of the human experience. The shroud, with its dirt from Jerusalem and its real human hemoglobin, is the ultimate icon of that belief. It suggests that the divine didn't stay distant. It left its DNA on a piece of linen. The religious significance of the shroud is found in the gaze. When people look at the face on the shroud, they see a man who appears peaceful despite the evidence of horrific trauma. There is a sense of majesty and stillness in the image that has inspired icons and art for over 1,000 years. To Christianity, the shroud is a love letter written in blood and light, a message that death is not a wall, but a doorway, and that the light of the world was not just a metaphor, but a physical reality that scorched itself into history. The cloth is more than a mystery. It is a witness that stands at the intersection of what we can prove and what we must believe. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the world's most mysterious artifacts, don't forget to subscribe for more explorations into the intersection of science, history, and the unknown.